Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and also on the web at WFHR.com. We also welcome Jesse and our friends from River Cities Media, who are here digitally recording our session, and you can view that online at River Cities Media or go to your local public access channel on your cable system. Why are they here? Because Wood County Board Chairman Lance Pliml is here for his monthly report to us, and we say good morning to County Board Chairman Lance Pliml. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Carl. You know that little jingle you play with the Morning Magazine? I hear that in my head before I go speak anywhere now. It just kind of sticks with me. I'm going on. I'm going to hear that jingle. So
Okay.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Okay. Well, this is a time of the year when we have state of messages. Roger Goodell's going to give a state of the NFL on Friday. That should be interesting. Next week, on Wednesday night, Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Verwink will give his state of the city. We've just heard from both the President of the United States and Governor Scott Walker give their respective state of messages. So, with that in mind, and in the spirit of the season, as County Board Chairman for Wood County, what would you say is the state of Wood County?
Well, I guess I like to simplify it pretty much. We're in pretty good shape. And I think that's because we've been pretty responsible all along the way over many, many years. We certainly don't spend more money than we have. We try to keep tax rates and levies as low as possible. We can't print money. We can't use deficit spending. So things all are pretty good. I think if the people looked out there, they would see that we have delivered a consistent level of service at a pretty low cost for many, many years, and I think you'll continue to see that into the future.
Okay. One of the things the county did with its most recent budget, you decided to take advantage of those low interest rates to borrow some money so you can do some infrastructure improvements. I would imagine the planning's underway for where that work is going to be done this building season whenever it begins. Our
county has been basically debt-free forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a pay-as-you-go mentality. We had some very immediate needs to fix some highways before they crumbled because their total reconstruction cost is much greater than repairing those when we had the opportunity. We also looked at interest rates, at or below 2%. And we said if there's a chance or a time to do this, this is the best opportunity. So we took advantage of a bonding issue, came out about $5 million roughly, where we're going to do work on. Carl, I'd be lying. I wish I would have brought the list in front of you. I think it's about 8 different roadways.
Okay.
We're going to get those back into shape, try to make those last another 20 years.
They're throughout the county?
They're throughout the county, yeah. And I actually had a list, and probably if I pulled my phone out of my pocket, I could probably find that. But we're going to work on those that need obviously are in the greatest state of disrepair.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get those up to snuff so they last, like I said, another 15 to 20 years. And during that time, the state and the federal government are looking at different ways to fund transportation. Highways and infrastructure are a huge issue right now. As you heard in the State of the State and the State of the Union message, we have a somewhat crumbling infrastructure throughout the country. I think Wisconsin's been pretty good, probably a little bit ahead of the curve, but we know that the dollars that are currently appropriated for those particular uses are not adequate. And that doesn't mean that we need more of your dollars. It means we have to allocate some of the dollars we have that go in different directions, maybe to that specific need. Well,
to speak to that point, the professional organization representing engineers that do this kind of work and have examined bridges have said ominously, it's not a question of if, but when we have another bridge collapse like what happened in the Twin Cities, and that's a little scary.
It is, and we know that a number of the bridges, are reaching those ages. And that level of deterioration, it needs to be taken care of. Transportation budget every year is a huge budget. And there's not just the ongoing maintenance, but there's the construction of new roads and highways as population builds out. the important part for us from a county perspective is, we see dollars being spent at the federal level and at the state level. Those of you who've had the opportunity to drive to Milwaukee have certainly seen the construction around the zoo interchange, some of those projects. And what we're trying to do is get some of those dollars allocated to our part of the states to handle some of the build-out that we have. And some of that might be, for instance, in the frac sand industry, or if you do have a CAFO developed, you need additional structure under those roads and be able to handle that traffic. We've seen a tremendous amount of increase, not only in traffic, but the weights of those trucks over time. Originally, when those roads were built, back in the 50s and 60s, they were not built to handle the loads that we have today. So we need a way to fund that. We need a way to fix it, because as we talk to all players, whether it be those government entities, manufacturers and commerce, even the retailers, they know they need to bring those goods to market. They need to bring those customers to those stores. And infrastructure as a whole, but transportation extremely important. The other part of that we're looking at very, very carefully is the build out of broadband access, and Wi-Fi really county and statewide. We know we have to have a communication infrastructure to match those hard highways.
Yeah, you mentioned frac sand, and we should point out for our listeners and viewers that when we're talking about the projects that you're talking about aren't the ones affected by frac sand, and that frac sand, you have an agreement with these companies. And I know there's been some concern with the crash in oil prices, what might be happening to fracking and what might lead down the line to frac sand mines. So do you have some concerns in those areas?
That's excellent insight. First of all, we do have road agreements, and those people that do extraordinary damage to those roads will fix those roads. In other words, the impacts they have are handled. There are still other impacts to those roads above and beyond, but we've done the engineering on those. We know what their impacts are, and they have been contributing to a fund to make those roads whole again at the end of the day. So that, in essence, has been taken care of. The dollars that we've allocated in this bonding process really don't go to those roads. They're going other directions. There is some build-out, though, that may occur on some of those roads that have nothing to do with frac sand traffic. It might be straightening a road to accommodate higher speeds. There's other considerations that come into play, along with accident reports. Where do we have a fatality, for instance?
Sure.
Where do we need to improve an intersection? All of those things come into play at the end of the day, but they do handle that. From an economic perspective, you see oil prices creep up again a little bit. I think probably the most important thing we've done in this country is become somewhat energy independent or more independent, and I'd like to see us continue down that pathway. Obviously, the price of oil is going to impact, what happens out in North Dakota, in all of those other shale oil fields. There is still an extraordinary need for sand, though. They're still drilling everywhere. Sand that goes down those, I'm going to simplify this, the sand that goes down those holes in the fracking process as a proppant needs to be replaced also from time to time. So believe it or not, it doesn't last forever. So it is extracted and new sand is put down. I've said a long time ago that I think you'll see a contraction in that industry as the big players tend to take over and some of the smaller players go away.
Yep.
Scale,
that's happening in the oil
scale of economics. You're seeing it in farming. We have that right now currently as an issue in our own county. When we talk about CAFOs, for instance. Somebody asked a great question at a seminar the other day. They said, well, are there more or less cows in Wood County than there used to be? The answer is there's probably less, but they tend to be in fewer places. So, how do you create a balance there? And we're seeing that in the frac sand industry. We're seeing that in retail. You're seeing that in government services. How do we do things more cost effectively and yet provide the service to the public?
Well, the governor has talked about, and he's going to be going into more detail during his budget message. And speaking of which, you're going to be in Madison that day. I guess you won't be present. You're at a county boards association thing. But from putting on your county boards association hat, what are you hoping to hear from the governor? And he's talking about some consolidation of various governmental agencies. They're letting out the different aspects of the program. Yesterday they talked about what the plan is for helping the Milwaukee Bucks stay in Milwaukee, and making the UW system independent by cutting some of its money. What, from a county board's perspective, what are your concerns, and what would you like to hear from the governor?
Well, the devil is always in the detail.
Well, yeah.
And every level of government has tried to certainly maintain a tax rate or level or decrease that. And I applaud the governor for trying to do that. I will be in Madison next week for the Wisconsin County's legislative sessions, and ironically, those two events overlap. We're going to see that budget roll out, and over the next 12 hours, the county's legislative staff is going to try to dissect that to the most minute detail they can, and then present that to the full body and what those impacts will be to us. From a county perspective, the one thing I guess we would like to see is no more unfunded mandates.
I was going to ask you about that.
If you're going to require us to do something, and counties are an administrative arm of state government, if you're going to require us to do something, then fund it. If you're going to require us to do it at a higher level, then give us more money. Or let us make those decisions and back some of those services off or trim where necessary. But the unfunded mandates is the big one that really hits us. Transportation funding, Secretary Gottlieb, the Local Government Institute, and a lot of people have weighed in on where that transportation budget should be, where it's going to go, and how they're going to get there. I don't know if you're going to hear any details on, for instance, regional transit authorities to fund highways, open road tolling. That's another big one that has certainly been bantied about. It will be very interesting. I think at the end of the day, what you're going to hear for the governor is he will not increase taxes. He will lower taxes. We're going to have to find more effective and innovative ways to do things. And I guess at the end of the day, what I would like to see him tell us is somewhat along the lines of what he's doing with the university is we're going to untether you and let you be as effective as possible. And I'm going to use an example, and I may ruffle a few feathers or irritate some people.
Well, that's what we do on this program.
I guess I personally find it mind-boggling sometimes when the state comes out and says, we're going to issue a large grant for the click it or ticket program, seatbelt enforcement.
Right.
Now, I think wearing a seatbelt is a really good idea, especially if you want to stay alive in a traffic accident. But at the end of the day, when I look at the number of dollars that we spend in specific programs, and I don't like to just pick on them, but on that particular program, or on saturation patrols for OWI, for instance, what I wish they would do is give those dollars to, for instance, our sheriff's department in a lump sum and say, Sheriff, we want you to use this money as effectively as possible to make your community safer. Instead of saying we're going to just spend X number of dollars doing this, whether we need it or not necessarily.
Okay.
So I would like to see that with highway funding in various areas. The basket of funds or basket of money that we get from the state comes from so many different appropriations in different areas. Frankly, we'd never know what's coming or when it's coming. In highways, there's CHIP A, CHIP D, TRIP A, TRIP D,
Sure.
Special funding for all kinds of things, general transportation aids. I think what we would like to see is have the state take some of those tethers off and say, here's the money you have. Use it as wisely and effectively as you can to make your community the safest community it can be, provide the most services you can provide. And sometimes when government gets further from the people, it becomes less effective. And I think that has certainly been borne out by the debacle they've had with the VA hospital. Mm-hmm. It amazes me when your representatives at a federal level say they don't know what's going on. Well, it's pretty hard to know what's going on if you happen to be sitting in Washington. The closer you are to the problem, the more easily it is addressed. And typically, the more economically it's addressed and the more quickly it is addressed. And I see that both of our U.S. senators, along with those representatives, have found this, at a high level of concern, and it has certainly caught their attention. If it was run by local people, it probably would have caught their attention immediately. And that's the point with all of this stuff. The further you get from the source, the less action you typically have on the particular problem.
So you would prefer to use for lack of a better term.
Don't take the money, leave it here.
Yeah.
Let us deal with the problem.
That would be the ultimate thing. Don't take it But if you're going to give us money, give it in a block grant type of a format and say, here's your transportation money. Spend it or this is for transportation and highway enforcement, etc. You folks decide in Wood County how you're going to use it.
Don't micromanage it. Mm-hmm. Because for every one of those programs, there's another layer of administration somewhere in Madison or in Washington.
I'm sure the sheriff would have ideas of where he could put it.
I know he would. Sheriff Reichert and I have had this conversation before. At the end of the day, his goal is to make our community a better, safer place to live. He's charged with that, and he's has a much better grasp on how to spend those dollars than somebody does who's 100 miles away, or in some cases 1,000 miles away. The same thing with social services. We know where those needs are locally, and we know that we may not have some problems that other areas have, and to just throw dollars at an area because the funding dictates where those dollars get spent, to me is somewhat ridiculous. Now, there might be other people out there who disagree, but I think we can be more effective. I think you in your own household probably make better decisions as to where you need to spend money on a daily basis than some guy in Madison might make those decisions. And the same holds true for government. We're a bunch of people trying to do the best thing too.
Yeah, well, and budgets have consequences, and they state priorities, and so it's going to be interesting to see, given the projected shortfall right now with the state, what's going to happen.
Yeah, and in this administration, I told people going forward the same thing. When we looked at the projections for this the coming election at the state level, we saw a legislature that was going to probably become more conservative, and we had a prediction that the governor would win re-election. And we know that the legislature and the governor are pro-business. And we know, so we anticipate that the budget and much of the legislation coming down will help ease some of those, governmental constraints on business. That's a fact.
Okay.
And then everything is predicated on balance. We hear sometimes that the DNR is too aggressive in enforcement. In other cases, we hear they're not attentive enough to those issues.
I'll give you an example of that. I've seen bumper stickers on one pickup. These two bumper stickers. Stop CAFOs. And I stand with Walker.
So, everything's a balance. The gray areas are the tough ones to deal with. The black and white, is really simple. I've used that example all the time. There's a pothole on a county highway. All right, go throw some filler in it, mix and fill it, and it's done. That's pretty simple. The tough decisions come when you have that person who has, a disability in some respect. You have a veteran who just came back, maybe from Afghanistan or Iraq, who's been injured. Where do we allocate those dollars?
That's going to be a huge need going forward.
It's going to be a huge need. Does it go to the child? Does it go to the veteran? How do we divide that up? How do we try to make everybody happy at the end of the day? And I think that the one thing everybody would agree on, there's never enough dollars. Yet if I ask each and every one of you out there if you pay enough taxes, the answer almost unequivocally is yes, I do. And you people in government need to do a better job of spending that money. And that's where I say take some of those tethers off and some of those requirements, and some of them are nonsensical, and let us operate.
Another way we can see efficiencies, and it's happening in the state and across the nation, regardless of political affiliation, is intergovernmental cooperation between government or sharing of services or sharing of equipment. During the mayor's monthly visit here, we were talking about this city getting active to try to redevelop that east side of the downtown near the courthouse. They have. That's why they've been buying up property. They want to, and they got some. I guess there's some interest in those properties. And the mayor mentioned, going forward, we want to have some discussions with Wood County to see if we can, if something we're doing can help them, because he understands where you folks are going with your studies about facilities, equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, the nice part in our area is our government entities tend to be on the same page. Mayor Vrewink, Mayor Meyer up in Marshfield, most of the towns and their governmental units have pretty much had a unified mission or thought process. The mayor and I, along with several other people, have had conversations for at least a year now as to how we might better utilize that space. They picked up on the fact that we had a space needs committee and that we were going to need additional space at some time. They realize that they have an area that they might be able to improve. And how do we work together to do that? And it's typically through those public-private partnerships. I have been, I think, at the forefront of the formation of many of those consortiums, the Aging Disability Resource Center that we put together, and that consortium, it started with Marathon in Wood County, and we've rolled in other counties now with income maintenance consortiums, with ITBEC, which you and I were just talking about, which is the International Trade Business Economic Development Commission, where we deal with all the, counties in the north, central, northeast part of the state. We have found great efficiencies in that. We don't need multiple administrators. You still need the people out there doing the work, but we have found great savings. We have found that we've been able to deliver service in a much better way and to many more people at a lower cost. And I think the ADRC, the Aging Disability Resource Center, really showed that. We were able to provide a much greater level of service, and we have not increased the cost of that over the last 7 or 8 years. Again, efficiencies, and that's what we look at everywhere.
Okay, and it looks like that's what the governor is going to be pushing for state government, the consolidation of some programs and agencies, and then, of course, that could trickle down to affecting local governments because you relate with those agencies, or at least you say you're the arm of state government. If two agencies that used to have two different programs that Wood County administered all of a sudden become one, that's going to affect how you administer those programs.
Well, if you come from a business background like I did, and then you delve into government like I have, you just want to bang your head against the wall some days. Most people in town have certainly driven around the roundabout over by the courthouse.
Yeah.
And, I'm not a huge roundabout guy, but, it seems to be effective. That was not a county project. That was, a city project. But my point wasn't are roundabouts good or bad. It was the amount of permitting that had to go on to get that roundabout in. From the historical societies with the removal of a courthouse or a sidewalk and a tree at the courthouse to what could be, possibly under the ground and buried somewhere. When we look at the dollars and the requirements to get work done, if we could streamline some of that stuff, we could cut so much government waste, it would be unbelievable. And that was just a local example that I can think of that happened pretty quick. But, the number of trips, the number of forms, and the process, projects that should take a year, take 2 and 3 years, and time is money.
Laws and regulations. You hear this at the local level, especially when they're recodifying their ordinance books or what have you. You have a new regulation, and it's sounds like a previous regulation that was on the book that everybody forgot about that hasn't been enforced, but we're going to have a new regulation to do what the old regulation did.
It's a regulation for everything in every scenario, and you don't need a rule for everything that happens once. And we were talking about this before we went on the air, and I was kind of laughing. I was watching the national news yesterday, and one of them said they were going to have the 10 steps that every parent must take before they send their kid out to play in the snow. And
mine was wear your snow pants and don't be late for supper.
Yeah, get home before dark. I don't remember having 10 steps we had to go through, and that's basically though what we see at the government level. Anytime there's any problem anywhere, we want to pass a rule, regulation, ordinance, or law to deal with it. And it might not happen. It's like Haley's Common. It might come around again once every 100 years or 200 years. It just, you don't need a rule and regulation for everything, because when rules and regulations and statute books get too thick, nobody reads them.
Yeah, well, that's what happens, and then those rules and regulations don't get enforced because, if we could, you hear that all the time at local. Well, it's time to go over our ordinance book. We haven't done this in a while.
We could probably do a whole show of those, or I could just pull you county ones that I say, what are we thinking? What are we doing? And we do work on those constantly. They're working on them right now, again. And my mantra has been, if you want a new one, get rid of 2 old ones. It doesn't always work that way, but that's a goal.
Well, our time is up.
Already?
I know. Well, this is getting good. But I appreciate your time. I know you got a very busy schedule ahead of you, so it will be an interesting coming week, both locally and statewide, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thank you very much for having me, Carl.
Wood County Board Chairman Lance Pliml, wrapping up part 1 of today's Morning Magazine. As always, the magazine is brought to you by Comfort Air.